Hey there, welcome back to Discover Top 5, the place where we explore some of the most intriguing, mind-blowing, and surprising facts you won't find anywhere else. Today, we're diving into a topic that has been whispered about, debated, and even imagined on the grandest of scales. Could the United States ever break apart? Could the Union actually unravel at the seams, with states going their own way, creating a new era of rebellion? Sounds like something out of a history book or a movie, right? But trust me, this isn't just fiction, this is happening, and it could actually be more realistic than you think. Now, the idea of states breaking away from the US might sound outrageous to some, but with growing political divisions, cultural rifts, and economic frustrations, there are serious conversations happening right now. From coast to coast, there are movements pushing for state independence, some of which even have political backing. The whispers are becoming louder, the petitions are gaining traction, and who knows? The next big shift in American history could come from the states themselves. In today's video, we're going to take a closer look at 10 states that could potentially break away from the United States in the future. Whether it's due to economic power, cultural clashes, historical grievances, or political frustrations, we're going to break it all down. Now, before we dive in, if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our top 5 lists, deep dives, and eye-opening content. And hey, if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps our channel grow, and we've got a lot of exciting stuff coming your way. So, buckle up, because this one is going to be a wild ride. Let's jump into it.
There's a quiet undercurrent sweeping through the nation, one that you may have heard whispered on the news or murmured on the streets. Could America be on the brink of breaking apart? Well, it sounds like something out of a history book. These discussions are happening right now. From the halls of power to the small towns of America, the big question is, what does it mean when states start openly questioning their place in the Union? From Texas to California, and even Hawaii to Vermont, movements are brewing, petitions are circulating, and yes, some politicians are openly suggesting a future where the United States is no longer so united. Could a state really decide to go its own way? Could we see a modern-day rebellion? History has generally said no, it's unlikely. But let's not forget, history has been wrong before. So, what would it take for one or more states to break away? Today, we'll explore 10 states that, for various reasons, could one day decide to part ways with the US. Texas. It's big, bold, and brimming with pride. It might surprise some, but there's a real movement gaining momentum that is pushing for Texas to leave the United States. And this isn't just an internet rumor or angry social media post. It's a serious political movement, and it's called Texit. While it might sound like fringe talk, it's anything but. Texas was once an independent republic before joining the Union in 1845, and some Texans argued that statehood was always meant to be temporary. But here's the catch: Texas is unique. And like most states, Texas retains the legal right to split into 5 separate states, a vestige of its time as an independent nation. Still, secession is a much more complex issue than simply holding a vote. In recent years, Texas has seen growing discontent over federal policies, especially on border control, economic independence, and social issues. Supporters of the Texit movement argue that Texas has the 10th largest economy in the world, making it financially capable of standing alone. Texas produces more energy than any other state: oil, natural gas, wind, and solar, and it doesn't rely on the federal government for economic survival. The Texas nationalist movement (TNM) has been pushing for a referendum much like the UK's Brexit vote. And while a 2021 bill proposing a vote on Texas independence didn't pass, it sent a clear message. Some Texans are serious about this. However, we must remember, the Civil War already settled the issue of whether a state can legally leave the Union. Secession would face legal, political, and even military challenges. Yet, the idea persists. Could it happen? Not tomorrow, perhaps. But the seeds have been planted. Now, let's turn to California. If California were its own country, it would have the 5th largest economy in the world, surpassing countries like the UK and India. And for years, there's been a movement pushing for California to break away, fueled by political and cultural divides that make the state feel like a nation unto itself. California has always been different. It's home to Silicon Valley, a booming tech industry, and progressive policies that seem to clash with Washington's stance. Whether it's immigration, climate change, or social policies, California often finds itself at odds with federal decisions. Many Californians ask, why should they answer to a government that doesn't reflect their values? In 2017, the Yes California movement made headlines when they gathered signatures for an independence referendum. Though it didn't make it to the ballot, However, this wasn't the end. In 2020, another proposal emerged, a new California movement which suggested splitting the state in two. The plan involved allowing rural areas to remain part of the U.S., while the coastal regions would form their own independent country. California's departure from the Union wouldn't just be a logistical headache, it would be an economic nightmare for Washington. The state contributes more to the federal government than it receives in services, which means its loss would leave a significant hole in the national budget. And let's not forget, California is home to major military bases, Silicon Valley, and Hollywood, key aspects of America's global influence. Even so, secession would be incredibly difficult. The U.S. Constitution doesn't allow for a legal path to break away, and any attempt to do so would face intense resistance. Still, if tensions between California and Washington keep rising, could independence be in the cards? Right now, it's just talk, but, as history has shown, even the most radical ideas can become reality under the right circumstances. Hawaii's independence movement isn't just a relic of history, it's very much alive today. Many native Hawaiians still harbor deep resentment toward the U.S. government because Hawaii wasn't just admitted as a state, it was taken. In 1893, a group of American businessmen, backed by U.S. military forces, overthrew Queen Liliuokalani, and the islands were annexed in 1898. Many Hawaiians argue that their statehood in 1959 was illegitimate, a forced union rather than a democratic choice. This history has fueled the Hawaiian sovereignty movement, which seeks to restore independence. The push for recognition of Native Hawaiians as a separate nation, similar to Native American tribes, is a significant part of the movement. Others advocate for the full restoration of the Hawaiian kingdom, arguing that the U.S. occupation is illegal under international law. Alaska may not be at the forefront of secession talk, but it has a long history of independent sentiment. Alaska wasn't always part of the U.S. It was purchased from Russia in 1867 for $7.2 million, a deal mocked by many at the time. But once massive oil reserves were discovered, Alaska's value skyrocketed, and it became a state in 1959. Still, not everyone in Alaska was on board with joining the U.S. Some Alaskans felt that statehood was illegitimate. In the 1980s, the Alaskan Independence Party (AIP) gained traction, arguing that the state should have had the right to vote for full independence. Economically, Alaska has a lot of resources: oil, gas, minerals, and more. The state is more self-sufficient than many others, yet it also heavily relies on federal funding. If the U.S. were to cut that funding, it could spur a renewed push for independence. The frontier spirit in Alaska hasn't disappeared. If the U.S. were to enter an economic downturn or implement policies that clash with Alaska's interests, the idea of breaking away could rise again. Florida might seem like a politically divided state, but it's even more fragmented than you might think. The division in Florida goes beyond Republican versus Democrat. It's a cultural and regional divide. South Florida, with cities like Miami, is multicultural, liberal, and globally connected. Meanwhile, North Florida and the Panhandle are deeply conservative, with traditional Southern values and a strong distrust of federal control. This divide has led to a growing movement in South Florida, where activists have suggested the idea of breaking away from the rest of the state or even forming an independent nation. The argument? Rising sea levels and the environmental crisis. South Florida officials claim that the federal government isn't doing enough to protect their cities from flooding and hurricanes, and some believe that Florida should have its own government to prioritize these concerns. Yet, there's a big obstacle. Florida is heavily dependent on federal benefits like Social Security and Medicare, which would be at risk if the state seceded. Still, Florida's political and cultural divide is growing, and if the state continues to swing between extremes, it might not just be Washington that Florida is fighting, it might be itself. New Hampshire has always had a rebellious streak, and its independence movement is alive and well today. The state's motto, "Live free or die," speaks to a deeply ingrained belief in self-governance and individual liberty. In 2001, the Free State Project encouraged libertarians to move to New Hampshire and push for minimal government control. Thousands of libertarians took up the challenge, and now many state legislators align with this ideal. In 2022, a group of New Hampshire lawmakers introduced a bill to formally secede from the United States, something that hadn't been seriously proposed since the Civil War.
While the bill didn't pass, it sent a strong message. Some New Hampshire residents are fed up with federal control. Economically, the state is strong. It is a growing tech sector, a booming real estate market, and no state income tax. But for many, the push for independence is more about freedom and self-determination than money or resources. Oregon's political divide runs deeper than you might think. While Portland is a liberal stronghold, much of the state's rural areas are pushing for separation. The issue isn't just about leaving the U.S., it's about leaving Oregon itself. Many rural counties have voted in favor of joining Idaho, where the politics align more with their values. The Greater Idaho movement aims to redraw state lines and shift conservative areas into Idaho. However, moving state borders is a complicated process. Both the Oregon and Idaho legislatures, along with Congress, would need to approve it. Still, the frustration in rural Oregon is real, and as Portland continues to push progressive policies, the desire to break away will likely continue to grow. Like Oregon, Washington is politically divided. While Seattle dominates the state's political landscape, rural areas in eastern Washington feel left out. For decades, they've fought for more influence, arguing that Seattle's politics don't represent their values. The solution: a new state called Liberty. This movement to split Washington in half has been around since the 1980s, but it's gaining more traction today as rural Washingtonians feel increasingly alienated from the Seattle-dominated political system. Creating a new state isn't easy, but if the cultural and political divide between Western and Eastern Washington continues to deepen, this movement could gain serious momentum in the years ahead. South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union in 1860, sparking the Civil War. Today, there are still groups within the state advocating for secession, fueled by frustration with federal overreach. These groups argue that Washington's political shifts don't align with the state's values. For South Carolina, it's not just about economics, it's about identity. The conversation around secession here never truly ended. Vermont's independence movement might surprise you. The Second Vermont Republic believes that the federal government is corrupt, unsustainable, and beyond saving. Unlike other states pushing for secession, Vermont's movement is less about partisan politics and more about a return to self-sufficiency and sustainability. Vermont was once an independent republic before joining the U.S. in 1791. The movement is small, but as political divisions continue to grow, Vermont's quiet push for independence could become a louder call in the future.
And there you have it, folks, the 10 states that could one day decide to break away from the United States, whether driven by political frustration, economic independence, or cultural clashes. The idea of states splitting from the Union might sound like something from the history books, but as we've seen, it's very much alive in some places. So, what do you think? Could we really see the United States fracture? Which state do you think is most likely to leave the Union? I want to hear your thoughts. So drop a comment down below and let's get the conversation going. I always love hearing from you. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends who might be just as fascinated by the idea of a divided America. And remember, if you haven't subscribed to Discover Top 5 yet, now's the time. We've got more mind-bending, eye-opening videos coming your way, so you won't want to miss any of them. Also, if you have any other topics you'd like us to dive into, be sure to leave those suggestions in the comments, so we're always on the lookout for new ideas to bring you the best content possible. Before you go, make sure you follow us on social media for behind-the-scenes content, updates, and a sneak peek at what's coming up next. Thank you for being part of the Discover Top 5 community. We're growing, and it's all because of you. Until next time, keep discovering the world's most amazing facts. And remember, anything is possible when you look at things from a new perspective.